Well, welcome to the Unstuck Church podcast. I'm Sean from the Unstuck team, and our team is taking a short break from podcasting this summer, but we're bringing you some of the most popular episodes from the year so far. And today we're actually replaying a conversation about a common paradox churches face, feeling understaffed in some areas while being overstaffed in others. In the episode, Amy and I discuss how to assess your current reality, where you are today, and then take strategic steps towards a healthier team structure in the future. Before we dive in, though, I want to thank Plain Joe for sponsoring our podcast. You know, it's a really good exercise just to choose an upcoming Sunday and put yourself in the perspective of a new guest. Drive to church, park your car, maybe where you don't normally park, and then walk inside. Are you confident that new guests would know where to go? If not, I'd encourage you to reach out to Plain Joe. They have a creative team of experts at creating placemaking, signs, and wayfinding markers that will tell your church's unique story and point your people in the right direction from the very moment that they arrive on campus. I've personally used them at my churches, and you can learn more about Plain Joe at plainjoe.net. All right, here's our conversation about the understaffed team with too many people. We're starting a new series today called Church Staffing Oxymorons. And I don't know why this came to mind, Amy, but one of my favorite all-time Michael Scott quotes from The Office popped into my head. Probably because it's an oxymoron as well. But Michael was talking about leadership. And he said, would I rather be feared or loved? Both. I want people to be afraid of how much they love me.
So Michael Scott. Man, my son watched that show 24/7 when he lived at home. And still today, when he comes home from Florida, it starts playing on a loop the whole time. It's so cringy, but so Michael Scott.
I love it. Well, in this series, we're diving into the staffing challenges that seem to contradict themselves. And if you've ever felt the tension of insufficient staffing, roles that just don't align, or leadership gaps that keep widening, you're not alone. So over the next 3 episodes, we're going to help you move from that reactive, we need someone now approach to building a strategic staffing model that actually supports your ministry vision.
That's right. So we're going to give you some straight talk about assessment, about hiring, and building leadership structures that scale with some practical next steps you can implement right away. And so let's kick it off with just a list of the contradictions we brainstormed. First, an oxymoron, right? Like jumbo shrimp, being overstaffed and understaffed at the exact same time, or having both the right and the wrong people on your team, and then maintaining structures that don't work for today or tomorrow. That'll be a fun one. But we'll unpack this first one this week, and we'll address the other 2 in the next 2 episodes.
So this is the church staffing oxymoron we're unpacking this week, and it's one we see all the time. The church can be sensing something like, we are an understaffed team with too many people on it. And how can both of those things feel so true at the same time, Amy?
I love the way you worded that. We're an understaffed team with too many people on it. No, it's such a common question that I've walked with pastors through this past year. In fact, in 2024, I worked with over 20 churches on their staffing and structure challenges. And this conflict of feeling both overstaffed and understaffed was a top issue for most of them. In fact, I was just with a church this week, and in my pre-meeting with the executive pastor, he was sharing how the staff is feeling overwhelmed right now. They're wearing 2, 3, 4 hats to keep the ministry moving. But when I ran their vital signs, they were actually allocating too much of their budget to staffing. Their attendance to staff ratio was low. We talk about this a lot. 1 full-time employee for every 75 people at the church. Theirs was under 50. And so that data actually reveals that they are more likely overstaffed. And it's funny too, because I think the most overstaffed churches I work with actually feel the most need for more staff. Now, I don't doubt that this church I'm referencing has a team that feels stretched and thin. That's a real thing. They feel understaffed. But the opposite is also true, that they're overstaffed compared to healthy, growing churches. And here's another one, Sean, related to that point. Some church teams are both over and understaffed because of how they've structured and resourced their teams. Let me give you an example. One church I worked with, they had a staff team of about 30 full-time equivalents. And in reviewing their current structure, I discovered that they were dedicating like 20% of those FTEs to their adult discipleship team. So 7.5 people, and only 11%, 3.5 FTEs to their weekend experience team, like music and production. Now, the average for these teams for churches of a comparable size should be more like 12% for discipleship. That's 3 less people on the team, and about 15% for the weekend. That would jump to over 5 FTE. So for them, they were over and understaffed. They were overstaffed in discipleship, and they were understaffed on the weekend. And by the way, these average staffing allocations that I'm quoting, they came from one of our quarterly Unstuck Church reports last year. And I mentioned discipleship and the weekend averages, but let me run through the other ones. And now most of our listeners, you're probably driving, you're out for a walk, or if you're in Minnesota, you're inside on the treadmill for a walk. So we'll put this full chart in the show notes so that you can reference it. But for a church like this one that was over 1,000 in size for their weekend attendance, here's those allocations. Senior leadership, 11%. Worship arts, 15%. Digital and communication, 6%. Next Gen Ministries, 22%. Adult Min, 12%. Operations, 14%. And then there's this other bucket that's 11%. So those percentages, by the way, they shift the smaller the church is. And instead of sharing all those numbers, which aren't going to be meaningful until you can actually look at them, you can find those in the show notes. And just a little plug here, Sean. If you find these comparative numbers helpful, please participate in our upcoming Unstuck Church survey that comes out in April. That's where these numbers came from last year's survey. And I'll tell you what, the more churches that participate, the better our data is going to be. And as best as I can tell, these comparative numbers that we put out last year did not exist until Unstuck started gathering the data. So set aside 10, 20 minutes and share your church's information. It will help the Big C church and ministry leaders assess their staffing structure, just like I hope it will be helpful for you today to assess how you're allocating your staff. So mark your April calendar, make it a priority, and then we'll share with you the results in May.
Absolutely. That's a good word, Amy, and good encouragement, because the more data, the more reliable the data is. So appreciate that. And they can find the table for the breakdown of FTEs by church size, FTE allocation by church size in the second quarter's report from 2024, so Q2 of 2024. And if you're subscribed to the Learning Hub, you can go back and find the information there. All right. That's very helpful, Amy. Can you share some stories just to kind of illustrate what this feels like on a church staff?
Yeah, what it feels like to be over or understaffed.
Yes.
I think it really depends on the cause of the over and understaffing. For the church I just referenced that was overstaffed in adult ministries, my analysis was that they were primarily hiring doers of ministry. They had several staff that were dedicated to care and counseling, and these were great people, but they were hiring what should be filled primarily by volunteer leaders and volunteers. Meanwhile, the weekend team operated very scrappy, very lean. And this, of course, is the team that had to put on 52 events a year. And that's just the weekend service. Right. But add in support for discipleship-related events, other church-wide events. That team was just out of gas. And they didn't voice this, but my guess is that the workload, the weekend load, and the relentless nature of the weekend, my guess is it felt extremely unfair in how they were staffed comparatively. And then for the church that's over or understaffed due to over programming, those teams usually feel like they never have enough volunteers. They wear too many hats. They're under-supported by the communications team, which, by the way, is often understaffed and always strapped for resources. Yeah, but that's what I experience on teams that are under or overstaffed due to over-programming. For the church that's over or understaffed, but not necessarily over-programmed, they often feel like they need more staff because they are likely doing most of the ministry. So this is so common in adult and next gen ministries when we don't have those multiplying, equipping leaders on the ministry teams. They are so busy. They are so strapped for people resources. And they might be talking about quitting because of burnout. That's some of the things I hear on those teams. And then I guess lastly, for the over or understaffed multi-site church, They often feel overwhelmed by the multiple hats they're wearing. They don't know who makes what decisions. They're consumed by way too many meetings, and they feel like they never have time to think and work on their ministry. So if any of those relate, those may be symptoms of an over or understaffing.
Yeah. I'm sure those are all relatable to churches that are listening today. So what's the most common solution that churches take when they kind of face this oxymoron?
Yeah, well, the most common solution is just to rearrange where everyone sits on the bus. That'll solve it.
Yeah, right. That is a classic church move for sure. What's the better solution then?
Yeah, I'm kidding. As a solution, but I'm not kidding that it's the most common solution or some version of it. And if you're listening today and we've hit on some of your pain points right now, instead of dashing ahead and taking action, I actually want to encourage you to slow down. I want you to do some analysis and some planning on what needs to happen next. Making staffing and structure changes on a team is a stressor for your organization. Even good changes cause a lot of stress on a team when we're talking on the people side. So this is not an area to go fire, ready, aim. We want to take our time. So my advice would be start with assessment and perspective. In other words, know your starting point. And a common tool out there is the 4 helpful list. It was developed, I believe, by Tom Patterson, but he just has 4 simple questions. What's right? What's wrong? What's confused? What's missing? So start there. And whether you do this by yourself or you assemble your leadership team, start with the question, what's right? Like, what is working? And I want you to do this because most of us as leaders, we love to jump on the problems, and that's where our brains go. I want to encourage you just instead, take a few minutes to assess, where are we healthy? After all, you don't want to lose that secret sauce that you have on your team as you make changes. So make note of what's going well. And then I would ask what's wrong or what's not working. And these are the things you know you need to change. And don't try solving them, by the way, as you're brainstorming the problems. Just write them down. Some common things that I would put in this category are things like, again, what's wrong, what's not working, staff communication. We're spending too much money on staff. There's a poor use of our time. There's inconsistent time off. Whatever it is, drain your brain and get those things in writing. The third one, what's confused or what's confusing. This decision-making often falls in this bucket, like where are the lines of authority and decision-making? Yeah. Or for a church, that's experiencing this and they're about to go multi-site, how will we lead 2 sites? We don't know yet. Why aren't we developing, more volunteer leaders? That would be a question. Where are we overstaffed and understaffed? It's all examples of what can be confusing. By the way, confusing ones are often stated as a question because we don't know the answer.
Sure.
And then lastly, what's missing? And again, we are just brainstorming, so it's not that we're going to add all these things or these positions, but as you assess your team, what's missing? And maybe it's a specific role, like a leader over spiritual formation. Maybe it's a missing ministry, like we don't have a clear leadership development path. Or what's missing? Performance feedback. We don't have a system for that. So I would just encourage you all to start there. And then the next priority would be to get or ensure that you have leaders and leadership roles in all the crucial ministry areas. This is a keystone step because people with a leadership gift must be in leadership positions. You are not ready to be making any staffing changes until you have the right leaders around the table in the right roles. So get that leader wrong by putting someone with a lower leadership gifting than the role requires, and you will make little progress on these challenges.
Yeah, that's really good, Amy. We have a few tools available online that can help with the assessment and perspective part on this.
Yeah, these are the ones I'd encourage you to dive into. Number 1, the vital signs assessment. This will give you clarity on whether you're overstaffed or understaffed from a budget standpoint. Again, we should be spending about 45 to 55% of our overall budget on staffing. You need to see where you're at. Another great resource is the Unstuck Teams Assessment. This will give you clarity on the health and performance of your team from kind of that macro level before you start making decisions. There are a lot of learnings. And, I know some of you also use Best Christian Workplace. Fine, you can use that one too, but just get your staff's input through a survey where they don't have to be named, but they can provide their input so you can get a clear picture on what the team is reflecting back to you as the leader. And both, like you said, Sean, both are available in the Unstuck Learning Hub, and you can find that on our website at theunstuckgroup.com. And the last thing I'd say is just get some outside eyes on your staffing and your organizational structure. One of the reasons our staffing and structure process is so popular is really just because we can help you look at structure objectively. I want to share some recent feedback, Sean, that we received from a few churches that we served. But I just want to be clear to our listeners, my point here is not to pat ourselves on the back. We don't deserve that. These pastors do, because they leaned in and they addressed their staffing and structure pain points. One church in the Atlanta area said, restructuring our team in an effort to maximize gifting and passion while simultaneously preparing for multiplied growth that they've been seeing and expect to continue to see in the days ahead. They just said it is not an easy task. Unstuck provided a ton of insight and made this process seamless and pain-free. I would turn to them again in a heartbeat. Okay, that does kind of warm my heart that they were satisfied. I like this line too. Another church said, the assessments were valuable. The consulting and feedback were invaluable. We are better equipped as a team, and especially as a leadership team, to move forward with implementing the mission. And this last one, the biggest takeaways from the overall Unstuck process, this pastor said, for us, came in the staffing and structure to give us confidence moving forward that we are doing the right things and heading in the right direction. So just get some outside eyes on your plans, whether it's, Unstuck or another trusted organization. You're going to learn some things that you didn't think about. And the reason I called out that last one, Sean, is I love how he said it gave us confidence to move forward. Again, this staffing structure changes is a very stress-filled process for an organization. So we want to help give you that confidence that you're taking the right steps and support you.
Yeah. Man, that is so good to hear. It's encouraging, but again, kudos to those pastors and churches for taking the needed steps they had to in order to address those pain points. All right, Amy, before we wrap up today, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, if you're feeling the tensions we talked through today about being over and understaffed, I just want you to know that this is normal. Your team is normal. This is a headline tension for many, many churches right now. And I also want to tell you that this topic of being over or understaffed today is just one part in our series. So please don't jump into any major restructure out of one podcast.
Right.
Instead, just take one of those objective next steps like vital signs or the Unstuck Teams assessment. Get some objective data on your current reality. I really want you to have clarity around the real problem and the priority problems that need to be addressed. And also with our show notes, I'm going to also include a link to a free resource on restructuring your team. If that's something you're sensing, that will help take the conversation down the road a little bit further.
Well, thanks for listening to the Unstuck Church podcast this week. If you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to get every week's episode of the Unstuck Church podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll be back with brand new conversations starting August 6th. Until then, we're praying for you and your church.